Hi everyone, welcome to Lecture 4 Part 1 on Arguments and Logic. The objectives for this video are the following. After watching, everybody should be able to. Number 1, define the terms argument and logic. Number 2, put a given argument into standard logical form. And number 3, explain why arguments can have varying degrees of strength. Now these are the topics of sections 1 and 2 of chapter 2 in the book. So far what we've had is a crash course in deductive logic, and in this chapter inductive logic enters the picture, and we'll begin to see how after this lecture. Now we've already seen the definition of an argument in lecture 3 part 2, so I'll talk first in a bit more detail about what the word argument might mean and how we arrive at the definition that we arrive at here. Now, an argument might refer to several different things as we ordinarily use the word. So pause for a moment and write down as many uses as you can of the word argument as we might use it in our everyday language. Okay, so 3 examples of where we use argument in everyday language are these, although I'm sure there are more. We might speak of 2 people having an argument, or of one person putting forward an argument, or the value of a function as depending on the values of its arguments. Only one of these uses is important for us, and that's the second one. Now, when we say someone is putting forward an argument, we think of them as giving some reasons that are supposed to persuade us that a certain claim they are making is correct. We call that last claim the conclusion of the argument, and the reasons given we call the premises of the argument. Now you might think that in light of that you can go ahead and define an argument as a list of sentences, one of which is the conclusion and the rest of which are premises. But that won't do for us, and here's why. Here's a bunch of sentences that don't put forward an argument. They say, which way's the beach? 17 is a great number. It's time for dinner. Now obviously this is intended to be a silly example, but the point is that if you said these things, you would not be trying to persuade anybody of a factual claim. This is why it won't do to define an argument as merely a bunch of sentences, where one is the conclusion and the rest are premises. You want the sentences to express definite factual claims. And we've already seen what we call a sentence that expresses a definite factual claim. We define that thing as a statement way back in the beginning. So we define arguments in terms of statements rather than in terms of sentences, and that gives us the definition that we saw in the previous lecture video. This one here. An argument is a list of statements, one of which is designated as the conclusion and the rest of which are designated as premises. Now, in spoken English, if you're putting forward an argument, you don't really say something like P, Q, and R are my premises and S is my conclusion. But the conclusion and premises are usually clear because of the presence of indicator words. Now I know indicator words are covered in LPS 29, so if any of you have taken that course, hopefully this will be familiar. Some premise indicator words are these. We have for, since, because, granted that, given that, and so on. This isn't an exhaustive list, but these are some common premise indicator words that come before a premise in an argument. Some conclusion indicator words are these ones. Therefore, thus, hence, so, for this reason, consequently, and it follows that, and so on. Again, this list isn't exhaustive, but these are some common ones. So let's have a quick quiz to reinforce the distinction between premise and conclusion indicator words. Now, in spoken English, you might well hear someone put forward an argument where they state the conclusion first. Here's an example of that. This argument says, Pen is mortal because all women are mortal and Pen is a woman. Now, the indicator words are what tell you which statements are premises and which is the conclusion, despite the conclusion coming first. The indicator word here is because. That tells us that the things following it are premises. So the conclusion is the statement before it, which is stated first. Now in logic, of course, we're interested in clarity rather than various literary styles. So for our purposes, we're interested in a clear method of stating an argument, indicating which statements are the premises and which is the conclusion. This method is called putting an argument into standard logical form. And an argument in standard logical form will look like the arguments we saw in the previous lecture video. So let's do an example. Take the argument you can see there. So it says pen is mortal because all women are mortal and pen is a woman. We've said, in light of the indicator word because, that the statements all women are mortal and pen is a woman are both premises. And we've also said that pen is mortal is the conclusion of this argument. So to put this argument into standard logical form, we first list the premises and we separate them from the conclusion by a line. Now if we read this argument out, I would say all women are mortal, pen is a woman, therefore pen is mortal. The point being that I read the line there on the screen as the word therefore. Now notice also that last time we wrote the premises side by side, but for reasons of space I've stacked them on top of each other here. I said last time that those two different ways of writing an argument are the same thing for us. So this is that last argument in standard logical form. Now, the reason we care about this is that we're interested generally in whether arguments people put forward are any good or not. Now, in some cases, one thing we care about in determining whether an argument is any good or not is whether the argument is valid. Now, we know how to test arguments for validity once they're in standard logical form because we did that last time. So it's important to be able to put arguments in written English into standard logical form so we can easily test them for validity. So we're going to stop for a second and you can have a go at putting the following argument into standard form. Okay, so carrying on, determining whether an argument is any good or not comes down to a bit more than just testing for validity though, and this is where logic comes into the picture. When we evaluate an argument, we're interested in these two things. One, are the premises true? And two, supposing the premises are true, what sort of support do they give to the conclusion? Now, it's not our business as logicians to determine whether premises are true or not, although that certainly matters to the success of an argument. It's our business as logicians to care about the second consideration on the screen there. So suppose the premises are true. Does it follow that the conclusion is true? Or what sort of evidence do the premises provide in support of the conclusion? Is it weak evidence? Is it strong evidence? What kind of evidence is it? So in light of that, our definition of logic is the following one. We define logic as the study of the strength of the evidential link between the premises and conclusions of arguments. Now, in some arguments, the link between the premises and the conclusion is the strongest possible in that the truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. If we look again at the example we've been using, pen is a woman, all women are mortal, therefore pen is mortal. We notice that if the premises are true, if indeed pen is a woman, and if indeed all women are mortal, then it's guaranteed that pen is mortal. The conclusion is guaranteed. That is, we suppose the premises are true, and we notice that in that case, the conclusion is also true. We do not care as logicians, and we won't be interested generally in whether pen is in fact a woman, or whether in fact all women are mortal. That is, we won't care in general whether the premises are in fact true. Now there are other arguments where the link between the premises and the conclusion is not so strong as it is here, but the premises still provide some sort of support for the conclusion. And sometimes this support is weak and sometimes it's strong. So here's an example. It says, I'm fishing in the ocean off the pier. I'm using anchovies as bait. I stay there for 3 hours but don't get a single bite. I conclude that anchovies are useless bait. Now in this case, the truth of the premise, which we might state concisely if we were to put this argument into standard logical form as this thing, I didn't get a bite in 3 hours using anchovies as bait in the ocean. This premise doesn't guarantee the truth of the conclusion underneath it, which is that anchovies are useless bait. Now, why doesn't it guarantee the truth of that conclusion? Well, we can imagine circumstances in which the premise would be true and the conclusion would be false here. For example, suppose that ocean temperatures dropped unusually low, so low that the amount of microplankton and other things of that nature migrated to warmer waters. Then the fish that usually feed on those microplankton also migrate elsewhere because they would follow their food source. Then I'm not going to catch any fish regardless of the bait I use, simply because there are no fish present where I'm fishing. So my anchovies might be a perfectly good choice, they might be great bait. But if there are no fish in the waters, I'm not going to catch anything, no matter how long I stay there or what bait I use. Now, these circumstances are in fact possible. This happened as a result of the Silverado fire that hit the outskirts of Irvine back in 2020. So these circumstances are not impossible. Whether you would describe them as probable or not is a matter of taste. There are typically fires every year around Southern California, so maybe you describe the circumstances as moderately probable, kind of in the middle. If that's the case, then the premise provides moderate support for the conclusion, somewhere in the middle. On the other hand, you might think that those circumstances are in fact very unlikely. And in that case, you would say the premise provides much weaker support for the conclusion. The point is that we can see arguments as having varying degrees of strength. When the truth of the premises of an argument guarantees the truth of its conclusion, we have the strongest possible type of argument. And there are cases ranging from this maximum possible strength all the way down to the lowest possible strength, where the premises actually contradict the conclusion. So just before we round things off, have a go at the following question. Okay, so that discussion leads us nicely and finally into inductive logic, which we'll pick up next time in the next video. So I'll leave this one here for now. Finish off by rating your comfort with your understanding of the material in this lecture video, and I'll see you all next time.